One of the additions to a meal that my family absolutely loves is homemade French bread, so that's what I'm going to teach you how to make today. You're going to start out with 5 teaspoons of yeast, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and 2½ cups of warm water. I'm just going to give those a quick stir, and then I'll let them sit for 5 to 10 minutes. If you take a look at this yeast, you can see that it's nice and frothy on top of the water. That means it's activated and ready for the rest of our ingredients. At this point, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of melted butter. You can do shortening if you want, but I like the flavor that butter gives it a little bit better. And then we'll add 3 cups of white flour. And then sprinkle 1 tablespoon of salt over the top of the flour. Now this is ready for my mixer. And then it's just time to mix it with the dough hook. Now that everything's all mixed together, it's time to add some more flour. I usually add somewhere around another 3 cups. Sometimes I'll reserve just a little bit to make sure that I don't do too much. Everybody's flour is a little bit different, and depending on the humidity of your area, it's interesting just how many factors are involved. So today I added about 2½ cups, and that's just perfect. It's not sticky for my hands, but it's not too dry either. Now I cover my dough, and I'll let it sit for about ½ an hour. So now, as you can see, it's risen nicely. And now it's just a matter of separating it into the 2 different loaves. If I'm honest, with my family of 8 that are at home, I go ahead and I do a double batch of this. So I'm doing 4 loaves. But this particular recipe, this just makes 2. And so what I do is I kind of get a rough little rectangle going. And then I roll it out. Now when I first started doing this recipe, I thought it was a little weird that I would roll out the bread dough, because of course it's not going to be like a cinnamon roll, but it makes it have these nice layers to it. So I really like it. Okay. You can be as picky or not as you want. And then you just roll it up. Just like a cinnamon roll. Okay, now at this point, what we have to do is pinch those 2 portions together. Because as it's cooking, it's going to want to separate. This is where if you've let the dough be just a little bit stickier, it merges together a little bit better. If it's too dry, it comes apart for sure. And then at the very end, that's where you take it and fold it over so that you can't see the end there, which usually works out because generally the end's going to be a little bit thinner anyways. And then as you roll it back over, you can see you've got a lovely little tube. Here's my pan. It's all pre-greased. And then what I like to do is add just a little bit of either cornmeal or grits to it. This grits this morning. That's what I had in the cupboard. And I just put it underneath where my bread is going to be. Works out pretty well. Okay, and then I'll gently pick this up and place it with that seam side down. So we'll do the second one. I've tried to add gluten to this recipe before, and I don't mind it. It makes it a little bit fluffier, but it kind of loses that French bread texture for me. So up to you if you want to try doing that. I do add gluten to a lot of my breads because I like how much fluffier it makes things, but in this case, I don't think it's necessary. And then again, just fold over those ends. Don't fold them over too far or you end up making it really lumpy at the end. I mean, not that anybody's going to complain about how it tastes. And if it's not quite long enough, you can stretch it out a little bit, or if it's too long, you can squish it up some. Our next step is to go ahead and cut our bread so that it has some nice diagonal slits in it. I usually cut 5 slits, so I'll do 1 at each end, 1 in the center, and then I'll go in the middle of those. And you do your slits about halfway through the loaf, so they're a pretty hearty bite taken out of the dough. And this makes it so that it just expands really well. Next, I take an egg, and I add just a tiny bit of water to it to make it more liquid. And then I mix them together well. And I usually just use my little brush for this. You can do it with a fork if you want to. And you just want to make a really nice egg wash. And then you want to take that wash and put it all along your bread. Make sure you get it inside those nice grooves that you just put in. I actually got this recipe from a friend of mine who is in our Grange group. She is just so great. Before we did Grange together, we did 4-H together too, and she's just always been a really good person and cooks fabulously. Now, of course, she makes it a little bit different than I do because, well, that's what we do, right? We take recipes that were shared with us and we make them our own. One of my favorite things to do is collect recipes from people. Anytime I try something that tastes good, I try to find out what the recipe is. Now it's time to let it rest for another 30 minutes. Now that the French bread has had a chance to rise, I'll do another coat of the egg wash. There's just something about French bread that is so good. You know, it's a very basic bread, but that makes it so that it's a great pairing with so many different things. Now we'll bake it in the oven at 375 for 15 minutes. Now the bread is almost done. We're just going to do one more coat of our egg. This gives it just a really nice crusty base. And of course that lovely golden color, which this one's turning a little bit faster than it usually does. Sometimes what I do to make it slow down in the color is I'll put a little bit of tin foil over it for that first 15 minutes. I didn't do that today though. And so now I'll just go ahead and I'll put it on the bottom this time. I had it in the middle the last time. And I'll let it keep cooking until it is nice and done. That golden brown and not doughy in the middle. And these look just perfect, being nice and golden brown. We'll let them cool for just a little bit and then we'll cut into them. This makes for a nice chewy bread with a really crispy outside. And it's beautifully golden. Really an all-around great French bread.